Okay, recording has started. Okay, so we're going to begin the sutta class. And so we'll start with 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then we recite the verse of homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so today is December 19th, 2020. We're coming to the end of this rather strange year. And now we are continuing now with our reading of Anguttara Nikaya, that's the Buddha's numerical discourses. And we are in the chapter with similes of animals. So we did a number of suttas with similes of horses. Now we come to sutta number 114. So this sutta revolves around the simile of a king's bull elephant. And so in ancient India, the important part of the king's army would be the elephant troops. There would be the cavalry, the horse troops, the elephant troops, and of course the infantry, the foot soldiers. And at the head of the elephant troops, there was the bull elephant, who is considered an important factor of kingship. One of the marks of an authentic, legitimate king is the possession of a large, powerful bull elephant with big tusks rising to the sky. And the elephant will use those tusks in battle. Okay, so here we have 4 characteristics of the king's bull elephant. So what are these 4 characteristics? The elephant is one who listens, who destroys, who patiently endures, and who goes. And now he's going to explain each of these characteristics. So how is the king's bull elephant one who listens? So the text says, whatever task the elephant trainer sets for it, the bull elephant listens, heeds it, attends to it, directs his whole mind to it, and listens with eager ears. Yeah, I don't have personal experience in training an elephant, but when I was in Sri Lanka, what was quite remarkable is the way different groups, it would be like temples or sometimes workforces, would capture these elephants and like live out in the wild, in the jungle. And they can be very violent, destructive, unruly. And somehow the elephant trainers are able to capture the elephant, tame it, and train it so that it can perform many, many tasks. Even I remember my first week in Sri Lanka, I was staying at a temple in Colombo, and the monk who was sort of my guide to Colombo at that time took me to the zoo, Dehivala Zoo, and the chief attraction of the zoo at Dehivala was the dancing elephants. So at a certain time, everybody gathers and they form an audience, and then the elephants come out and they do various kinds of dances. So it's quite remarkable that this wild animal can be trained to perform all of these remarkable feats. And somehow, even though there's not a common language between the mahout, the elephant trainer, and the elephant, but somehow the elephant trainer is able to convey to the elephant exactly what task he wants the elephant to perform. And so to perform that task, the elephant somehow, I don't know how this takes on, how this occurs, but he listens to the elephant trainer, attends to what he's saying, directing his whole mind to it. So in this way, the elephant is one who listens. Second, the elephant trainer is one who destroys. And then this is explained when the elephant, the bull elephant, has entered the battle, it demolishes the other elephants, the elephants of the enemy. It knocks the riders off those elephants. It attacks, it destroys the horses and the cavalry, the chariots and the charioteers and the infantry. So in that way, the bull elephant is one who destroys. So that's how the king can triumph, or the king's army can triumph in the battle, through having this big, powerful elephant that will destroy all of the troops of the enemy. But the bull elephant, when it enters into battle, it will be subject to all kinds of attacks, all sorts of violence. And so to prevail, the elephant needs patience. It has to patiently endure. So how does it patiently endure? So when it enters into the battle, it gets struck by spears, by swords, by arrows, by axes. So it gets injured, but still it persists. It doesn't give up. It's not deterred when it's struck by spears and other things, but it persists. It charges right ahead until it's conquered the enemy. And then there'll be all sorts of noise that will ordinarily frighten an untrained elephant. Drums, kettle drums, conchas, tom-toms. But the elephant doesn't give up and become discouraged, but persists. And then the elephant is one who goes. So the elephant quickly goes to whatever region the elephant trainer sends it, whether it's ever gone there before. So those are the four qualities, the outstanding qualities of a king's bull elephant, which makes that elephant an asset, an accessory of the king. And so in a similar way, of course, the Buddha is describing the elephant, not because he delights in describing animals, but to establish a simile for the ideal practitioner. And this is the monk who possesses four qualities that makes that monk worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, and so on, the supreme field of merit for the world. So just like the elephant, the monk is one who listens, who destroys, who patiently endures, and who goes. So how is the monk, or let's say any disciple, one who listens? So when the Buddha's Dhamma is being proclaimed, being taught, then the practitioner heeds it, attends to it, directs his or her whole mind to it, and listens with eager ears. We have to remember that this factor is especially important during the Buddha's time and for hundreds of years thereafter. I mean, it's still important today, but during the early period, It was especially important because the scriptures, the Buddha's scriptures, were not written down in book form, but the teachings were always preserved in memory and transmitted orally. And so when somebody is, in order to learn the Dhamma, one has to go to a teacher and listen to the Dhamma being taught. And when you listen, if you're going, that Dhamma is going to be the basis for your understanding of the nature of reality. And it's going to provide the guideposts or the guidelines that you need for your practice. So you don't just listen casually with a wandering mind, taking out your cell phone and looking at any new email messages or any interesting news while the speaker is speaking. But you have to preserve that in your memory. And so you have to listen very, very closely. In fact, there are suttas where the Buddha speaks about 5 stages in learning the Dhamma. Okay, so what are the 5 stages in learning the Dhamma? Okay, so the first stage is that you listen to the Dhamma. Second stage, you retain it in mind. And so, in fact, in ancient times, what I've discovered in my own experience, because we live in a literate culture and we are accustomed to learning through reading books, so our memories atrophy, they become weaker, they lose their retentive capacity. But I found when I was living in Sri Lanka that simple people who are not so addicted to reading, even if they're literate, but they're not so dependent upon written materials for their knowledge and understanding, are able to retain instructions much, much better than I could retain them. I remember sometimes I would be traveling we had a driver with the Buddhist Publication Society that I was the editor for in Sri Lanka. And sometimes I would have to go on a trip with the driver and we would need directions. And so we would stop at a certain point and he would ask one of the townspeople for some directions. And the townsperson would rattle off a series of steps. You go down this street, turn right there, you go down there 3 blocks till you get to a traffic light, then you turn left, then you go 4 blocks, and then you turn to the left again, like that. And as soon as the townsperson finished speaking, I've practically forgotten what he said. But the driver, I would ask him, do you remember that? And he says, yes, I got it. And he would remember each step of the instruction. Okay, so you retain in mind, then to ensure that it remains in the mind over a period of time, you recite it periodically, you recite it verbally. And so this is this has become an important part of Buddhist learning, especially in the monasteries. What's done in the evening, this is in the monasteries that specialize in study, in Dharma study. in the evening, often there would be these walkways, and the monks go walking back and forth, reciting over and over the material that they studied during the day. And so you see the monks walking back and forth. Each one is Itipiso Bhagava. Well, that's just Evang me sutang ekang samayang bhagavasa vating viharatije tavane anatapindika sara me atikawan yatara devita bikantaya ratia bikantavanna keva kapangje tavanango basefa yena bhagavate lopasan kabi. Going on like that, reciting verbally. And now, since we don't emphasize verbal recitation so much, so what I say, if you want to retain in mind the Dhamma that you listen to, in place of reciting verbally, what you should do is take notes. Because when you take notes, even the act of writing the note helps to imprint the Dhamma in the mind. And then when you take the notes, then you have the material available to refresh your memory when you have to refer to review the material in the future. Okay, so these are 3 steps in learning, the first 3 steps, which ensure that the material that you learn is imprinted, is planted in the mind. But you also have to develop understanding. So the 4th step is to examine the meaning, to reflect on the meaning. So this is reflecting in order to comprehend the meaning conceptually, intellectually, to get a clear sense of the points that are being conveyed by the teaching. And it's at this stage that you can raise questions and bring the questions up to a teacher. Well, you can try to relate this teaching that you've learned to other teachings that you've learned in order to get a kind of cohesive and comprehensive view of the entire layout, the entire landscape of the Dhamma. And then the 5th stage in learning is to penetrate the meaning by insight, by view. So this is where you put the teaching into practice to gain insight into the teaching, personal insight. Okay, so those are your, you could say, extended stages in the process of listening, which is the key to learning the Dhamma. Okay, so how is the monk one who destroys? And this sounds a little bit violent, perhaps, but it's said that here the monk does not tolerate an arisen sensual thought or a thought of ill will. The text is actually going to mention the 3 kinds of unwholesome thoughts. The thought of ill will, we could say a thought that's motivated or driven by ill will, a thought of harming or injuring others, which is almost an outgrowth of ill will. And then just to cover everything, any other unwholesome states that arise. So in the case of all of these unwholesome thoughts, one abandons them, dispels them, terminates them, puts an end to them, and obliterates them. Yeah, the language here sounds rather forceful or violent, but sometimes the actual techniques that are most effective in overcoming these unwholesome thoughts is not using force and kind of mental violence, but sometimes using more subtle and delicate techniques. For example, in the Satipatthana system, one just becomes mindful of any unwholesome thoughts that arise, any thoughts that arise coming out of the 5 hindrances. One just notes that thought, mentally labels it, and then just lets the thought go its own way. And sometimes a method that's effective in overcoming the unwholesome thought is to keep the thought in the mind, but not to indulge the thought, not to follow up the impulses that lie behind the thought, but one just brings the thought into the mind and just looks into that thought and examines maybe the flavor or texture of the thought, or just isolates the thought from the underlying impetus behind the thought and just sees it as a mental fabrication. And that technique is sometimes sufficient to remove the thought. Or sometimes one inquires, what I found useful from time to time is when these disturbing and unwholesome thoughts arise, just keep on looking into the mind and watching for those thoughts to arise, and let them arise, but without latching onto them, and then vanish. And then you see just these thoughts are just part of the mental process of arising and passing away. If you go to the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 19, in that sutta, the Buddha will explain 5 methods of dealing with distracting thoughts. We won't go into all of the details here, but even though here, the point I just want to make is though the sutta uses this rather forceful language of dispelling, terminating, obliterating, sometimes the most effective way to do that is to use a soft and gentle approach rather than a forceful and assertive approach. Okay, the third quality that's necessary is patience. And particularly in ancient times, leading the monastic life, particularly those who live out in remote forest regions, far from human habitation, far from so-called civilization, you have to endure sometimes very difficult conditions. So I guess in northern India, even though we always think India is a hot country, but in fact in northern India, during certain months, January, February, it could get quite cold. So you have to endure the cold. And you wouldn't have this indoor heating. If you're living in a little hut out in the forest, you don't have a electric heater, or you don't have the kind of central heating, you just flip on the heater, but you have to endure that cold. Just putting on an extra robe or a shawl, and that's the most you have. And then during the hot season in India, it would be mainly late March, April, May. Those are the hottest months. You have to endure the heat, where it can get up to in the 90s, low hundreds. Hunger and thirst. Generally, in Buddhist countries now, the monks are quite well supplied with food. But in India, ancient India, the monks, if they go to regions which are not acquainted with the ways of Buddhist monks, when they go on their alms round, they might get very little, nothing at all. So they have to endure hunger, thirst, and then wherever you are, there are going to be these biting flies and mosquitoes, sometimes strong, harsh wind, and going out, the burning sun, and then the danger of serpents, of snakes. And you'll meet with people who speak in rude and offensive ways. And don't forget, like in Buddhist countries, the Buddhist monks will not encounter that so often nowadays. But in ancient India, when the monks, if they come to a Brahminic village, where the village people are followers of the Vedic tradition, they might have a rather aggressive, disparaging attitude towards the samanas, the ascetics. And so some of the Brahmins spoke about the Buddha himself as being a low, bold-headed ascetic. And then inevitably, the body is subject to various kinds of illness and pain. So it has to be able to endure bodily feelings that are painful, racking, sharp, piercing, harrowing, disagreeable, and that are taking one's vitality away. So in this way, the monk is one who patiently endures. And then, like the elephant, the monk is one who goes. And how does the monk go? And here the text just explains this in terms of the ultimate goal. The monk quickly goes to that region where he has never before gone in this long stretch of time. That is said to be, that is, in effect, what this means is going to Nibbana. So here it's spelled out as the stilling or settling down of all karmically constructive activities, the giving up of all acquisitions, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, Nibbana. So that is how the monk is one who goes. So that's the simile of the elephant, sutta on the simile of the elephant. Okay, we'll do another sutta, then we'll take some questions. And this next sutta, this I think is very important sutta as a kind of guide that we face in our everyday life. So this sutta speaks about four, I translate this as cases of deeds. The Pali, the Pali uses the expression Tana, the word Tana. So this word has many, many meanings. It's actually, you can see this better from the Sanskrit. Sthana. So it's related to the English words station, stand, status. But in Pali, it takes on the meaning of a case, a possibility, um, a position, a place, and so on. So here I translated it rather freely as cases of deeds. And so what are the four? Again, we have certain permutations here to get the four. We have one deed that is disagreeable and it portends to be harmful. Then there's the deed that's disagreeable, but it promises to be beneficial. Then there is the deed that's agreeable, pleasant to do, but it threatens to be harmful if one does it. In the long run, it's likely to be harmful. And then there's the deed that is agreeable to do, enjoyable, pleasant to do, but it promises to be beneficial. So the Buddha uses these permutations, this group of permutations, as a means of laying out the criterion or criteria for distinguishing who is the fool and who is the wise person. So now we run through them. So first we have the deed that's disagreeable, unpleasant, unpleasant to do, but it threatens to be harmful. And so when you think about a course of action like this, then you see that there are two reasons for avoiding that kind of action, two grounds. One is because of its immediate effect, because it's disagreeable. And the second is because of its likely long-term consequence, that it will be harmful. And so for this reason, when you reflect on that course of action, then you realize that, or you're naturally inclined to avoid that kind of action on both grounds, because you want to avoid the immediate present feeling of displeasure, of what's disagreeable, and because you want to avoid the long-term harm in the future that will come from following that course of action. Okay, now we come to the second case. So this is the deed that's disagreeable to do, but will prove to be beneficial in the future. So it's in this case, this is one of the cases where you can distinguish who is the fool and who is the wise person. Because the fool doesn't reflect that even though this deed is disagreeable now, it's going to be beneficial. And so the fool avoids that deed. The fool just considers in terms of the present feeling that accompanies the deed rather than the long-term consequences. And so the fool does not do that deed. And as a result, because he doesn't do that deed, he misses the benefit that will come. And so this turns out to be harmful. But the wise person reflects, even though this deed is disagreeable now, but if I do it, if I undertake that action, it's going to bring benefits in the future. And so the wise person does that deed and gains the benefits. So that's case number 2. Now we come to case number 3, the deed that's agreeable to do now, let me do a deed which is agreeable to do, proves beneficial, blocking the sun from my eyes. Okay, the deed that's agreeable to do, but proves harmful. So this also provides the basis for distinguishing who is the fool and who is the wise person. For the fool doesn't consider that this deed, this course of action, is enjoyable, pleasant, delightful to do now, but it proves harmful. So he doesn't consider that. And so he indulges himself. He undertakes that action. And so he enjoys doing it now, but in the long term, he has to reap the harmful consequences. In the future, he'll suffer. But the wise person is one who reflects and considers, even though this deed is agreeable to do, but it'll prove harmful in the long term. And so he doesn't do that deed and he refrains from it, and that proves beneficial. And then we have the fourth course of action. That's the one that's agreeable to do now, pleasant, enjoyable to do now, and it promises to be beneficial. And so this is the kind of deed that should be done on both grounds. So whether one is a fool or a wise person, because the deed is agreeable to do, one will do it, and the deed will bring beneficial consequences. So from case number 1 and case number 4, we can't distinguish who is the fool, who is the wise person. But it's cases number 2, where we have an action that's disagreeable but beneficial, and case number 3, where we have an action that's agreeable but that proves harmful. This is where we distinguish the fool and the wise person. And now I want to try to do an experiment. I would like to take maybe 2 minutes for each of you to reflect a little bit on your own experience, or maybe you could think of hypothetical examples. First, I give you 1 minute to think of a deed that's disagreeable, but which proves beneficial. And then 1 minute to think of a deed that's agreeable to do, and but threatens to be harmful, something that one should avoid doing. Number 2, something one should do, though it's disagreeable to do now, but it's beneficial in the long run. Number 3, a deed that one should avoid, because even though it's agreeable now, but it will bring harmful consequences. So you can maybe make some notes on this and then share them with the group. So I give you 1 minute to work on your own first for a kind of action that fits model number 2. Start. You could even write several, if several examples come to mind, you could write them, write them down. Okay, now 1 minute, a deed that's agreeable to do, enjoyable, but is likely to be harmful, the kind of deed you should avoid. Reflect, use your mind, your memory. Either draw upon your own experience, best to come from your own experience. But if you can't think of anything from your own experience, you could use a hypothetical example. Ten seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, anybody like to share with the group? First, we take case number 2, something disagreeable to do, but proves beneficial, likely to prove beneficial. Okay. I'd like to hear from some of the people who don't speak that often. Okay, we'll start. We'll just take them in the order. Gita,
Hey, did you want all four, Bhante, or did you only want two?
I only have two.
Okay, so
And
going to the
first,
dentist.
okay, that's a pretty obvious one. So going to
Yeah.
the dentist. So nobody likes to go to the dentist, but so it's disagreeable. But if you don't go to the dentist to get the treatment, then the toothache is the tooth is going to decay more, and it will be painful. And so when you go to the dentist, then you get the drilling and injection maybe, so it's disagreeable, but you avoid that pain of the tooth decay. Kaidi.
Hi, Bante. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Actually, it's not an example. I have a question regarding this paragraph. What if that one's deed is harmful to oneself but beneficial to the group in the long run? What if the deed is harmful to oneself but beneficial to the others?
It's a good question, but let's first just take some examples from people who have thought of, let's see what the other people have to say first.
Okay. Thank you, Bante.
Okay. Tracy?
Yes. Good morning, Bante.
Good morning.
Yeah, so what I have is to wake up early because I'm in California to take the class, or take time to meditate every day away from your busy schedule. But the benefits are very clear, short-term and long-term.
Yeah, okay, that's a good example. Somebody likes to lounge around in bed and to sleep extra hours. And so, especially maybe if you're on a meditation retreat or at a monastery where the gong will ring maybe 4:45 in the morning in order to join the group meditation and the morning liturgy, the morning chanting. And so it's disagreeable to get up early in the morning, but it's beneficial. And so you do it. And when you finish, if you finish speaking, then you lower the hand. Okay, Ron, you unmute.
Yes, hi, Bhante. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's funny about the first example because I'm actually a dentist. You're talking about things that are disagreeable.
Yeah, that's right.
And one of the things I thought of, I recently had to have surgery that I kept putting off. And I said, well, this is really disagreeable.
Yeah.
But there's a potential long-term benefit. So I decided to have it done, even though I knew the recovery was going to be fairly lengthy and unpleasant.
Yeah. Okay. In a way, that's a little analogous to going to the dentist. Yeah. It's like a medical example. Let's take some examples that are not related to the medical field. Anybody? Let's see. Sally Ann.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I thought immediately about fasting.
Okay, yeah, fasting, I guess, can be disagreeable and beneficial. Yeah. Okay, Don?
Yes, sometimes you give money to a poor person thinking he'll use it for food, but he goes and spends it on drinks or drugs. Like a beggar, you give money.
Yeah.
But they use it hoping that he'll go and buy some food. But they buy drugs or use it for drugs or drinks.
But we're not going to take into account the way that person uses the money. But let us say, okay, sort of it's a natural inclination of the mind to hold on to one's wealth, one's belongings, one's acquisitions. And so it could have somebody maybe with a miserly temperament, who's a greedy, miserly temperament, and he doesn't like to give, but he hears that it's beneficial to give and beneficial to oneself. We're not considering now the benefits that come to the person who receives the gift. And so he overcomes that natural disposition of clinging and grasping to his wealth. And he writes out a check to a worthy charity, makes the gift, and then that will on the one hand, that will help to break down to some extent that miserly disposition of the mind, and will help to open up the heart of that mind to the well-being of others. And so it will bring a kind of immediately visible present life benefit. Will come a kind of joy from giving, even though the person is reluctant to give. But if he forces himself, compels himself to give, it opens up the heart and brings an immediate enjoyment of freedom, a kind of openness of heart. And then from the Buddha's karmic point of view, to practice giving is to create the seed of merit, of wholesome karma, which in the future will bring agreeable results. So that's a deed that might be disagreeable to do, but is beneficial. In fact, there's a Jataka story. I think this was our Bodhisattva in a previous life. He had just two garments, the undergarment, this is like the sarong or the lungi covering the lower part of the body, and an upper garment, like a shawl covering the upper part of the body. And then he came across a poor man who didn't have, poor man who just had like a loincloth. And so he took off his upper garment. At first he was very reluctant because all he had were these two garments. He didn't have any other clothing. And so the natural tendency of his mind was to cling to the upper garment. I'm not going to give it. I'm not going to give it. But he saw that poor man with just a loincloth, nothing at all beyond that to cover himself. And then the voice spoke to his mind and said, practice generosity, give that poor man your upper garment. And so he tried to fight against that voice, but finally the voice of conscience won, and he took the upper garment and gave it to the poor man. And that became one aspect of his practice of the dana paramita, the perfection of giving. Okay, we'll take maybe one more example, maybe one or two more examples. Changhua.
Good morning, Bante. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah.
My example is wearing a mask during pandemic is disagreeable, but it's beneficial.
Exactly.
And based on this sutta, the politician who promote not to do it is a fool.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very, very good, very relevant example. So things that are disagreeable to do now, at least a little disagreeable, not terribly disagreeable, but to wear a mask, to observe social distancing, to avoid large gatherings. Like sometimes I see at certain political rallies when thousands of people are dying every day in the country, but there are these political rallies where thousands of people will come into one stadium, one hall, and they're standing shoulder to shoulder, no masks. And then a couple of weeks later, you hear in that area thousands of new cases of COVID-19. Several hundred people have died. Yeah, so things like wearing the mask, avoiding social distancing. So that shows us who is a fool, who is wise. Somebody from Karuna Buddhist Vihara, wow.
Hello.
Whoops. Okay, go on, unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. That's Aya Santusika.
Yes.
Oh.
Hello. Yeah, I'm happy to be able to join today. I'm on retreat. Yeah, I was thinking about the kinds of things that oftentimes we need to say,
Yeah.
or or are good to say, but they're painful to say, like maybe admitting that we're wrong, or maybe we have to talk to someone in our family or our students about something that's going on, and that it can be quite uncomfortable, but of course it could be very beneficial.
Yeah, that's a good example. And something that I thought of in the monastic context, like one of our procedures, if one commits a transgression of the monastic rules, one has to do a confession. If it's a minor confession to another fellow monastic, if it's a more serious transgression, one has to do the confession in a group and then undertake a certain procedure to be cleared of that offense. So it's sometimes disagreeable to do, since you have to confess your transgression, at least to another person or even to a group of people. But it's the way to be cleared of the offense. Whereas if you conceal the offense, then it festers inside. Okay, I think we've taken enough examples of the deed that's disagreeable but beneficial. So let's take some examples of deed that's agreeable to do, but can prove harmful. And I want to take some people who didn't speak up the last time. So we'll take Amy Lee. Whoops. Amy Lee, did you have your?
I did. I did. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right. Quick reaction on the buttons over here. A thought that is really in my life agreeable but harmful is fostering ill will. That sense of self-righteousness feels really good.
You find it agreeable to foster ill will?
It feels good, but it is really harmful.
I see. Well, maybe that's so, but my experience is the opposite. That if there's ill will, I find it disagreeable, but maybe to extend that, maybe to act on the basis of ill will. Like if you have feeling angry with somebody and then you speak spitefully to them, it feels good to get it out of your system by releasing that ill will, by denigrating somebody, ridiculing them, putting them down. But then it proves harmful in various ways.
Yeah, I find that anger, this emotion, is enlivening, impassioning in those moments. It's very enlivening, and it can be really tempting. I guess it's the honeyed arrow.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay, let's see some other ideas. Meichu.
Good morning, Bante. Like addictive behavior.
What behavior?
Addictive behavior are something like the binge watching movie, binge eating is enjoyable at the moment, but in the long run may be harmful.
Okay.
That are like taking the drug.
Yeah, okay, so some people will find taking drugs to be enjoyable, but that, but it proves in the long term to be harmful. Excuse me, I got some phlegm in my throat. Henry?
Yes, Pandey. For some deeds that are agreeable, like eating certain foods such as sugary foods and sweet foods, but then in the long term, it could be harmful to us, causing diabetes and things of that nature. So that's what my thought comes to my mind.
Okay, that's good. So, Damika?
Mark.
Mark, yeah.
You gave me that name, so.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to one that was disappointing. I once gave money to somebody who came to me and said, I can't go to, I was living in an urban environment, a needle exchange.
Say again, I didn't quite catch that.
I cannot go to the needle exchange for clean needles in the 80s.
Yeah.
So can you give me the money to buy a clean needle for, I'm going to do heroin.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, I will. That's always hung with me as something that I thought was a good deed. Because I assumed the person was going to do what he said he was going to do, is buy a clean needle.
Yeah.
But it's been 20, 30, almost 30 years now. How does that fit here? I have material wealth. I don't need $5. I could drop it on the ground. But I'm giving someone the agency to do something they claim that they're going to do that is safer. This is during the time of HIV conveyance.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. I think you got it.
Yeah, there are some cases which are very ambiguous. And here, I just want to take relatively clear-cut cases rather than to go into these rather ambiguous cases where you can look at the situation from different points of view. Just my opinion probably would be at that time, maybe the first choice is to try to persuade the person to go to, I don't know if there would have been agencies that help people break free from their addiction to heroin. So the first choice would have been to try to guide that person to break free from their addiction. But maybe if there was no alternative, perhaps it was a good thing to help the person buy at least a clean needle rather than risk using a dirty used needle and contracting HIV. Okay, maybe we should then at this point, okay, we'll take one more. I see Santa.
Oh yes, hi. This is regarding the current situation in the U.S. regarding social media and the spreading of misinformation.
Yeah.
So there's ongoing massive campaign to spread misinformation and conspiracy theory by certain groups and people.
Yeah.
The default Buddhist approach is to keep quiet, to stay quiet, spreading metta to those groups. But I think although that's an agreeable thing to do, but we should speak up and be firm in our approach and speak the truth and point out that that those people are trying to spread wrong information or conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. So let us say that this is something which is disagreeable to do and that it could be uncomfortable to speak up and to speak the truth. But it, at least to some extent, it'll prove beneficial. If one can give convincing arguments, it will at least maybe dissuade at least a few people to give up their distorted views and to understand the situation correctly. Okay, I want to move on to the next sutta. Actually, this one is fairly routine, doesn't really require much explanation. The more interesting one is, that needs some clarification, is number 117. So this is, one bent on his or her own welfare should practice heedfulness, mindfulness, and guarding of the mind in 4 instances. So what are the 4? So this is really concerned with curbing the arising first of the 3 unwholesome roots. And then a 4th item is added here called intoxication. So the first, one should practice heedfulness, mindfulness, and guarding of the mind. May my mind not become, here is translated, excited by things that provoke lust. But the word that's translated excited here in Pali is the past participle, or actually it's the verb that corresponds to raga, to lust. So literally, may my mind not become lustful, that doesn't sound so good, excited by lust in regard to things that provoke lust. And the second, may my mind not become hateful towards things that provoke hatred. May my mind not be deluded by things that delude the mind. And may my mind not become intoxicated by things that cause intoxication. And so here, this shows one of the applications of mindfulness. So usually when we hear mindfulness, we think of just being, for example, mindful of the body or being aware of whatever is happening to oneself. But here, and so mindfulness is sometimes cast in a rather passive function, as though it's just sitting back and observing what is happening from a kind of quiet, detached point of view. But here we see mindfulness exercising a more active function in the function of guarding the mind. Because if one doesn't guard the mind, then these deeply entrenched, unwholesome roots tend to arise when one encounters the objects that provoke those roots, those unwholesome roots, provoke them to arise from the dormant or latent condition into a more active condition. And so one has to practice, here the word used is appamada, which is translated heedfulness, not being negligent, not being indolent, not just drifting with the natural tendencies of the mind. But when one encounters things that are provocative, enjoyable, agreeable, exciting sense objects, particularly in the monastic training, things that provoke sexual desire, but it could be things, other things, exciting varieties of delightful foods and so on. One wants to guard the mind using mindfulness and energy. The mindfulness has to be coupled with virya, with energy, to prevent the arising of lust, of craving, of desire. Similarly, when one encounters things that are provocative of hatred, coarse speech from others, contentious political issues that tend to arouse one's antagonism, abuse and denigration from others, hostile conduct, irritating conduct on behalf of others, things that tend to provoke hatred. One has to use the heedfulness and mindfulness to keep watch over the mind. And if those states arise, lust or hatred arise, one can let them arise, but one watches them arising in the mind and doesn't let them get control over the mind. So one just watches them arise, notes them, and then uses energy to dispel them and drive them away. And then delusion is more subtle, perhaps. But there are many things that provoke delusion. And so again, one has to use mindfulness, heedfulness to guard the mind. And then the things that provoke intoxication. Here I found I have a note about the kinds of things that cause intoxication. So the classical list is one's youth, one's health, one's life. But then the Abhidhamma mentions still more objects of intoxication. Here is by birth here is meant one's social class, belonging to, particularly in an Indian context, if one belongs to the class of the Kshatriyas or the Brahmins, one tends to become proud because of one's social standing, one's family, one's wealth, one's honor, the respect, beauty, one's knowledge and learning and so forth. And so one can accept the things that are good, but one doesn't become intoxicated by them and overcome by them. And then the text just concludes that when one masters the mind in this way, then one does not shake, does not cower, does not tremble or become terrified, will become swayed by the words of other ascetics. Okay, maybe we could take some questions that come from anything that arose in the discussion today. We just have about 10 minutes for discussion. Okay, Young. Young?
Hi, Bante.
Hi.
In the guarding star, could you give some example for third one, the not be deluded by things that cause delusion? That would be help me.
The thing is that delusion often underlies the things that provoke lust, the things that provoke hatred. So whenever there's lust arising or hatred arising, there's some delusion that accompanies it. Let's say if we could think of something that provokes delusion. Okay, let us take maybe just watching nonsensical, just merely entertaining television programs, situation comedies, or what they call, is it called real TV? Reality TV?
Mm.
Those kind of programs that sort of entrance the mind. And when you watch them, I don't want to denigrate watching sports, and sometimes it's interesting to watch sports, but they have a kind of addictive effect on the mind, so that the mind just becomes completely engrossed in watching the reality TV, the situation comedies, and
Yes, that's brain numbing. Yes, that's right.
your mind numbing. You call this mind numbing types of programs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bante.
Okay, see you.
Oh, hi, Bante.
Hi.
When it comes to guarding the mind, I realized like things like sadness or feeling lonely and things like, unless we guard our mind, they could lead to pretty downward paths. And I wonder where it belongs in this category of 4.
It's not mentioned here, but we don't have to take these 4 as being all comprehensive. Yeah, but the Buddha is mentioning here the first 3 because those are the 3 unwholesome roots. And then the 4th, the 4th is added because it seems to me that the 4th is really an aspect of the 3rd of delusion. So these are mentioned because these are the 3 unwholesome roots that are involved. But there are other things that one also has to guard the mind against. So you mentioned sadness. So sometimes it's natural to feel sad. And sometimes one could even let oneself feel sad and observe it and appreciate that mood without sinking into a deeper feeling of dejection. For example, if one has lost a friend or a family member, then one will naturally feel sad about that. And I don't think one has to try to fight against that sadness, but one can let the sadness come into the mind while being aware that this is a mental state that has arisen because of certain conditions, and it will eventually pass. In that way, one doesn't get stuck in.
So, Bhante, emotion like sadness, that Buddha did not like put it as like a negative emotion to immediately get rid of, is it?
Well, from the standpoint of a Buddhist training, especially when the Buddha is speaking to the monks, he doesn't put it that way, but he always speaks about overcoming attachment and sadness in regard to the world. But I'm speaking in a more general way. When people feel sadness because of some disappointing condition that they meet in their life, or the loss of a loved one, or maybe it could be a divorce or loss of somebody gets sick. So I don't say that one should completely dispel all sadness at once, but one could allow oneself to feel a natural sadness but protecting the mind from being weighed down by that sadness. Yeah, I hear some people speaking who are not called upon. Please, if you're not speaking, mute your phone.
The handle name Carmen, can you mute yourself? Thank you.
In any case, we're going to have to end the program now because I'll have to go up for the meal. And before we do the sharing of the merit, I want to mention, okay, today is Saturday. So tomorrow there will be the group meditation over Zoom, guided by Bhante Mangala. That will be from 7 to 8 p.m. with the Q&A session from 8 to 8:30 p.m. On Wednesday, the 23rd, we will have the group meditation from 7 to 8 p.m. I won't have the Saturday class next week. That will be the 26th. And we won't have the group meditation on the following Sunday. The 27th. And we won't have the group meditation on Wednesday, December 30th. So after the Christmas holiday, the next group meditation will be on January 3rd, that's Sunday, and the Saturday class, we'll have the Saturday class on January 2nd. And so I wish everybody a happy holiday period and a happy and safe, healthy New Year. So let us do the sharing of the merits now. I'll just do it quickly. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata jabumata deva naga mahidika. Punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata jabumata deva naga mahidika. Punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mam parang. Bhavagupadaya vichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanyino dukha pumuchantu pusantu nibuting.
Sadhu,
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 sadhu.
sadhu,
Bhante.
Thank you,
Thank
Bhante.
you,
Thank you, Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Bhante.
Thank
Good to see
you.
you, Bhante.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Good
Thank
health to
you.
you, Bhante.
Good rest,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Namaste.
Happy New Year, Bhante.
Thank you,
Have
Bhante.
a happy holiday,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Have a
Bhante.
happy holiday,
Yeah.
Bhante.
Okay, thank you.
Stay
Be
well.
blessed.
Okay,
Be well.
thank you.
Bye.
Be
Thank
well.
you.
Sadhu,
Bye,
Bye.
sadhu,
Bhante.
sadhu.
Sadhu,
Thank you,
Sadhu,
sadhu.
Bhante.
sadhu.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you,
Thank
Bye,
you.
Bhante.
Bhante.
okay, I'm going to end.
Bye, Bhante.
Bye
Bye.
bye.